My name is Lucy Komori. I am a Sansei, third-generation Canadian of Japanese descent. My grandfather, Matsunosuke Komori, immigrated to Canada in 1899, seeking to better his life and to raise a family, a humble ambition shared by many immigrants. Then World War II tore his dreams apart. The Komoris were amongst the 22,000 Japanese Canadians living on the West Coast, forced from their homes and imprisoned in incarceration camps in the interior of BC. Young and old were deemed a security risk, a false narrative used to keep BC white, eliminating the economic threat of Japanese Canadians. Tsunagu means to connect. Through the voices of 5 Japanese Canadians from different generations and families, Tsunagu takes a glimpse at the many stories, traditions, and values we choose to share with our children and grandchildren.
I found this quirky photo in my dad's album. It's like clumsily cut out and everything. And then when I blew it up, because I wanted to see who he was, and I just find it very, beautiful. It's about love. I don't know who it is. I think it's a relative of some kind. And that's the other thing too, because now there's no one to ask. Right? Then with these two, I love this photo because he seems androgynous, and I don't know, it could be because back in the day when you got your photo taken, it was a very special event, and often men actually put makeup on. It harkens back to the impetus for my work, which is why were these photos saved? During the internment, they had to get rid of everything they couldn't carry in a suitcase. So why did they save these photos? They could have burned them like they did many other objects at the time, but they saved them. So I know that they were precious to them. But that's where it stops, because I don't know who they are. At family events, you don't want to come up to people and say, yes, well, let's talk about the worst part of your whole life, the internment. I think that was quite common in a lot of Canadian Japanese families. That, wasn't spoken about. The feeling in the air was just get on with it. Just work hard. Why go backwards, right? Go forwards. For me, maybe just having the curiosity about the past, that became very important to me, because how do you know where you're going unless you know where you came from, type of thing.
I would hear these stories from my grandpa, and I don't really remember asking specific questions when I was younger. It was sort of just if he was in a certain mood or a certain, time when he felt like he wanted to share something, and I would sort of get these glimpses into his life.
He wasn't always forthcoming with talking about, say, mass incarceration or the sort of ongoing racism that he and other Japanese Canadians experienced.
There really never was a lot of talk about what that was like emotionally for my grandfather. Intergenerational trauma wasn't necessarily part of the zeitgeist during their time of growing up and talking about that. You know, it's something that we talk about now, but it wasn't necessarily an option to talk about, I think, for my father's generation and for my grandfather.
So this is a collection of old photos. Some of them I hadn't seen before, but my uncle and aunt found them after my grandmother passed away, and they put together this collection of photos, which I would say most of them are before I was born. In 1985, this was the funeral for my grandfather, Motoi Iwanaka, and this is in Tashmi, where they were interned. So my grandfather, Iwanaka, he did not agree with being incarcerated or being forced to move, because that was his dream, was to come here, I think, to be rich at some point. To have everything stripped away from him after he had worked so hard for those first years, I'm sure he was, not very pleased with how that worked out with the treatment of Japanese Canadians. My parents and my grandparents, experienced a fair bit of racism, so it was not easy to find jobs. But then even if they did get a job, it was also still difficult just to keep their jobs.
My parents had a farm in Mount Lehman, BC, which was confiscated, and we were evacuated to Dufrost, Manitoba. My sister and myself and my mom and dad, there was just the four of us. So we sort of grew up going to school without any other Asians. I remember going to school in grade 1, and they'd never seen an Asian before, and I don't think they quite knew what to make of me, and I was rather an oddity.
So my paternal grandfather, Art Komori, he and another brother were sent to Japan to be educated as bozu, or to become Buddhist priests. In 1937, he and his brother returned to British Columbia, and he ended up meeting my grandmother at a Japanese Canadian bowling tournament in Kelowna, which I think is really cute.
I remember my grandpa talking about cutting jack pine near Taylor Lake when he was interned. At this point in time, when I was quite young, I didn't really understand what that had meant. I hadn't learned it in school. I hadn't really had a conversation with anyone about what that incarceration looked like.
From a pretty young age, my dad at least would push me fairly hard, whether it's academically or in sports. Growing up, I know that it wasn't good enough for him to be just as good as the next person next to him. He had to be better than the person next to him if you want to be successful in life, or at least be happy.
Well, my husband was a young teenager growing up in Strawberry Hill. And when this forceful evacuation happened, I think it was a very traumatic experience for him. It contributed to some depression and some of his ill health in later years. He never did talk about it to me either, but I know that he had written several letters to government agencies about when could they go back. He really missed his life back in BC. I think growing up was difficult for him after leaving all that he lost in BC.
I'm biased. He was my grandpa, but he was a really brilliant person. Here.
What are you doing now?
And I just imagine that if he could have finished high school, let alone pursued post-secondary, what might he have done differently? And it's very clear that, you know, he and my grandmother would have preferred not to have been incarcerated and not to have lived in poverty. And I think that has an enduring impact on everybody.
You want me to sharpen it for you? I can sharpen it for you. Grandma,
That's bad.
these peanut butter miso cookies have miso paste and chunky peanut butter in it.
Well, you know, I shouldn't say that. I should, you know, you should try before you knock it.
But you don't like the idea of it?
No, I don't.
You know,
like
there's
idea.
the sort of classic Japanese traditions, generosity and being humble and remaining grateful. I think more of my grandma, when I think of this, I guess, is like her unwavering ability to see the best in every single situation she walks into. Like, it's so amazing and so wonderful to learn from her, you know, how she has been through a lot of hardship, and of course my grandpa as well, and to be able to be thankful for something every day and really find the best in everything is incredibly like impactful for me. I think that's a really beautiful part of my heritage with them and my history with them.
Something that I feel like I've inherited from my grandpa was a kind of, especially towards the end of his life, he was happy to speak about the injustice in a really frank and forthcoming way. And something I really admired about him was his ability to make connections between his own experience of injustice and the experiences of injustice that other peoples in Canada have faced. He carried an abiding and intense concern about social justice issues all the way through to the end of his life. And I think that that's something that he passed on to me, and I think to Rachel too. Yeah.
Finish my candy. Yeah. There's about 3 tomatoes there that I want to put on there. Do not pick seed tomato.
If you could say anything to your grandfather right now.
Oh boy. Well, here come the waterworks. Oh my goodness. Wow. Sorry. What to think about that? Thank you for all of the photographs of me and my sister when we're kids and our family together. I think I'd let him know that my grandma's doing really well. You know, and that she's living a really full life and she's really happy and that she's being well looked after. I think that would matter to him.
He loved to talk about, my grandma still does, about how Rachel and I would go over there for weekends and he would have king crab and would be making king crab for us for breakfast because that's what we liked. So we were spoiled. I mean, and food is a big one. Like, he would always have snacks and things that we liked and loved to share them with us. He and my grandma together grew a ton of food in their big garden. And he showed us so much about how he gardened and was excited to sort of pass along his knowledge as an expression of love and pride that is not explicitly stated, but is very much in there.
The food part is a tradition that we've always had in our family. The New Year's tradition, where we have the udon at New Year's Eve. And then we have the ozoni and the mochi for New Year's Day. And try to have some of the Japanese foods that are vegan in the Buddhist tradition. My grandchildren have been brought up to at least try some of these things. I'm quite surprised when sometimes they have seconds of the ozoni, but they all do love the mochi.
Probably by the time I was maybe grade 5 or 6, racial slurs would start coming out, and so you'd hear it. I'd never, I guess, experienced bullying, but people would frequently say nip or chink or slant-eyed or something like that. I kind of mostly ignored it or just laughed along with it. So if it was, call other Asians chinks, then that's kind of what you did because that's what the other kids did. You try to be just completely as white as possible.
My children, none of them have married Japanese Canadian. Partly because I guess there weren't that many that they knew. My daughter is married to a fellow of Scottish descent, and one of my sons is married to somebody that's of Swedish descent. So the grandchildren were blonde when they were born. I accept it as just the way it is, and as long as they're healthy and they're happy, I think that's more important than how they look.
I was always an observer because I didn't feel I was actually a part of what was going on. Because I didn't look like everybody else, and I knew that. I just felt invisible. And that's what I think that this work is about. It's called invisibility. I wanted to become visible by being an artist and talking about my experience. In my art, I feel like I'm taking the past and bringing it into the present. And that's the motivation behind my work, is to build pride.
My mom is European Canadian. My mom has been like an incredible supporter for us, thinking about and learning about our identities and being really confident in that. And she used to take us to a Japanese Christmas. And I remember there was like Japanese Santa Claus handing out gifts to all, and there was lots of kids there. And I remember that being really special. And, my mom really made sure that there was no stone left unturned if we wanted to turn it kind of thing, and was really supportive in that.
I'm doing my historical dissertation, and this is something that historians get really worked up about. What is the point of learning about the past? What does it mean for understanding the present, and what does it mean for shaping the future? Given that the vast majority of Yonsei and then Gosei will be half Japanese or less, I would think that we might see a concurrent sort of decline in participation in Japanese Canadian organizations or events, but I'm not sure that that's the case. For instance, with the Powell Street Festival, that there are a lot of Yonsei participating and even kind of adapting the structure of the festival to reflect how they think of themselves as Yonsei Japanese Canadians. Cultural identity is not exactly the same as racial identity, and that being a certain percentage, whatever, doesn't have to dictate how you sort of connect with community and build community.
I didn't think it was very important when I was younger, but now I'm glad that this is all coming out, because I think it is very important that my children and my grandchildren know about their history, especially now that, as I say, my grandchildren, some don't even look like me. I would like them to retain some knowledge of their roots. I think this is a very important chapter in our history, and we should pass it on to them.
Internment camps in BC's wilderness are all I recall. But I'm too old to think about the past with bitterness in my heart. Fell in love with you in the camp so long ago. It kept us from the hatred and the bigotry that existed outside. Never know, never know.